Welcome to the Nervous Breakdown podcast. Today we're going to have an episode on cancer and anti-cancer drugs, seeing how they act, seeing this amazing layout here. We've got drugs, the AI, the cell cycle, drug targets, the DAOs. The idea of the buildings is just to show the scale of cancer, how it can rapidly spread throughout the body, like it's in a city. And let's start with cell cycle. So, different phases. Start with G1, cellular contents, all these things. Cell growth is primarily there. Number of organelles, chromosomes are duplicated as well. Remember that, it's always important. The S phase is the site of DNA synthesis, DNA replication as well, making sure that we can form homologous chromosomes. Oh, this is mitosis actually, so we don't need to form homologous pairs. However, making sure we form sister chromatids ready to be split. And the G2 phase is a site for error checking, DNA checking, as is S as well. Has a lot of error checking in it. And G2 will also grow the cell. And finally, mitosis, 10% of the cell cycle, has the presence of X-shaped chromosomes specifically, from a simplistic point of view. And finally, cytokinesis, the very last phase, last stage.
It's worth mentioning the G0 phase. The quiescent phase is where cells can go out of the cell cycle. This is often seen with things like your nervous system, your neurons. They don't divide. They're in a quiescent phase, so they don't enter the cell cycle.
Mm-hmm. So, first thing on our list is different types of cancer. Let's say that's the first thing we should do to preface. There's the basic types of malignant and benign, but can you expand on what those mean? How we get things like tumors developing, different types of tumors, especially in lung cancer, you have tumors in all sorts of locations, like in the esophagus, brachial, tracheal, different things like that. So, can you elaborate on that?
So I think when we're looking at cancer, the first thing we need to be looking at is what are some of the hallmarks of cancer? What is this distinguishing feature of cancer that differentiates it from human cells? Because cancer itself, it is exactly the same as your human cell. That they both, so the cell undergoing mitosis is the same way that the cancer will as well. So you need to be able to find a way to distinguish between a cancerous cell and a normal cell that is just going through the cell cycle. So that's what brought forth the hallmarks of cancer, which is first coined by Hardy and Weinberg in 2000. There's many different hallmarks of cancer, but I think some notable ones is the fact that there is a high rate of proliferation. There's replicative immortality. They can just keep going through and through the cell cycle, where they have an enzyme telomerase that keeps replenishing their telomeres, so they can keep doing this. Normal cells cannot do that, and they have something called senescence, where after a certain point they have to be destroyed because of the likelihood of mutations that are accumulated from the loss of these telomeres. Many different things as well. They can escape apoptosis, so they are able to just keep proliferating. And if things go wrong, such as mutations, they can still keep on dividing, where a normal cell would have cell cycle checkpoints pick these up and start initiating apoptotic pathways. So P53, these kind of different pathways would be activated and push the cell to die, but cancer cells keep surviving. So these are some of the different hallmarks. There's many more, and that's what distinguishes cancer from human cells. Now, the different types of cancer, it more comes down to benign versus malignant, the ability for the cancer to spread. So malignant is able to spread over a large different distance. It's not localized to a certain part of the body, a certain tissue, but it's able to invade new tissues and start new colonies and keep growing into those. The benign is different. It doesn't have the capacity to do that, so it's localized into one area. Now the different types, the cancers, are really all kind of the same. In essence, it's a tissue specific response where certain cells in the tissue start dividing and they start outcompeting the neighboring cells so they can predominate. So it's an element of natural selection that you see with cancer. And it just varies in the different types of tissue they're presenting. You can have some sort of brain cancer, cancer of the parenchyma there, that causes things like yeah, brain cancer. You can have different tissues. You can have lung cancer, different types of lung cancer, whether it's in the epithelium of the mesenchyme, again, and other tissues as well. It's the same process. Just depends what type of tissue it is, and then it will determine how the cancer is going to look like. In the brain, you have something called liquidated necrosis. So you get cancer there. It's going to be a solid tumor, but it's going to cause death of the brain. It's going to literally liquefy to mush in the surrounding areas. If you're in the blood, hematological cancer in the bone, it's not so solid. The cancer is spreading throughout the whole system. So there's a difference. And this brings different cancer dynamics and ways that you could target these different types with cancer drugs.
So you just mentioned about the blood. Could things like thromboses or blood clots form because of a type of cancer?
Potentially, the cancer could theoretically behave as a blood clot if a large portion of the cancer is able to clot a vessel. That is definitely a possibility. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Mhm.
That's a big question, I think.
And back to the idea of malignant and benign, is there a specific difference in the way they replicate or the way of, or the cells they target in particular that characterizes whether it becomes benign or malignant cancer?
Um, so cancer is known to have is acquiring mutations, and there's a different order of mutational acquiring, and you get different types of mutations at different stages of cancer, roughly, because everything is so highly variable. There's common patterns in the genes that are mutated, and after a certain point, you keep acquiring more and more mutations, and you get better at having ability to survive in foreign tissues. So if you have a certain mutational burden, you can start metastasizing. Certain genes, and specifically, can also, if they are hit, and they can give you that ability. But it's not really like that. It's only a subset from even from one cancer. It's only a subset that could even potentially become metastasis. So it's really not too well known, and there's many colliding factors that could contribute to this.
We don't give up. What are some risks associated with cancer? What can you get? Mutagenic agents could be one. Certain risk factors like smoking are the case. However, one piece of insight which is important to note is that smoking doesn't affect the chance to get a specific cancer known as adenocarcinoma in the lungs. So that's not a risk factor for adenocarcinoma. However, it is for all the other types of lung cancer. And is it a risk factor for other types of cancer as well, like skin cancer?
So smoking for skin cancer, I don't think there's a direct causality there. Um, in general, I think cancer types, different types of cancers, have their own risks involved. Mainly because of the method of administration, like smoking, you're getting direct insults to things like your lung tissue. So that's where you're going to see a lot of all the carcinogenic agents in smoke accumulating. Um, so these risk factors for cancer, these environmental insults, you could say, um, arise from things that are interacting with the cell cycle. So breast cancer, very, very common, can be present from estrogen because estrogen is proliferative for breast tissue. So you will see a lot of times breast cancer will be estrogen positive and they will be driven by estrogen. So things like onset of menstruation, menopause, how many kids you have will also affect cancer in that way. Other things like beta naphthalene, which is found in a lot of paints, turns out to be very much linked to bladder cancer from epidemiological studies. So it's kind of the interaction of different chemicals, different compounds, with DNA having a high mutational burden. Ionizing radiation, for example, can cause a lot of different types of cancer, especially skin cancer from high exposure to UV light and all these electromagnetic frequencies. So yes, different risks, different interactions with DNA, promoting the cell cycle. A lot of things are kind of more permissive to having cancer rather than direct causes of cancer. But if you're exposed over time, these permissive factors allow for cancer processes and mechanisms to persist and cause cancer.
Okay.